Hi and welcome back to the course. In the previous session, I talked about what an organization is, and I defined an organization as social structures created by individuals to support the collaborative pursuit of specified goals. This means that when we study organizations, we study individuals who coordinate their behavior to fulfill specified goals. Now, when I have defined an organization, I think it's good to pause a little bit and focus on the history of organizations, both as a phenomenon as well as a scientific discipline, to give you a bit of a background to organizations and organization theory. So let's start with the development of the modern organizations as a phenomenon. I think a common misunderstanding about organizations is that they are an expression of our industrialized society. But if we look into the archives, we see that organizations are very old phenomena. Historians, social scientists, and archaeologists have found traces of coordinated behavior such as division of labor, specialization, and large-scale production of products in most of the great civilization we know of today. For instance, the Babylonian Empire. Individuals were hired to produce printed texts and coordinated by a supervisor who gave them cord salaries to produce even more texts. Researchers have found texts from Chinese leaders that in detail describe how the military should be organized and controlled to achieve success at the battlefield. Some of the pyramids, like the Cheops pyramid, seem to have been built by a really large workforce. Some claim that as many as 100,000 people worked with agriculture half of the year and the construction of the pyramids the other half. Citizens of the Roman Empire had to be coordinated to sustain the empire. Taxes had to be collected. Soldiers were employed, and if they survived, they could get a pension from the empire, basically. Hierarchical systems were built to carry out tasks, and formal instructions were written about how to coordinate the administration of important activities, such as healthcare, accounting, and infrastructure. The industrialization, which we usually ascribe as a revolution giving birth of organizations, really changed the world. Still, the difference between organizations today and earlier forms of organizations might be more of a degree of rationalization, modernization, and complexity. The number and size of factories and the amount of work that was produced in factories increased enormously during the industrialization. With the rise of factories, new methods for documenting, for measuring, and for following up work was invented. The division of labor, the level of standardization, and the overall efficiency seem to have increased enormously. Work in factories often meant simplified and very specialized tasks. Workers had to follow strict rules. Working time was standardized by the use of clocks. For a farmer or for an individual who had previously been working as a craftsman, going into the factory problem meant a big change in life. At the farm, they could follow their own rules and they could set their own working hours. Farming was probably much more of a lifestyle than a job. With the expansion of factories, work became a job. Entrepreneurs had to learn how to run and how to lead work. They couldn't do everything by themselves, and as the factory grew larger, entrepreneurs had to hire workers and managers to help control the workers. Some of the first texts that was written about what a manager should do managing the factory described how the manager should monitor the quality in production, the quantity in production. The manager should monitor the machines and so that they knew when they needed to be repaired. They should monitor the costs to keep the cost as low as possible. But they should also discipline the workers. The increase in division of labor meant that new roles such as workers, managers, and owners became popular and taken for granted in a society. The ownership of the factory came to be separate from the leadership of the factory. And the workers became their own category, separated from owners and managers. I think it's important to remember that many of the methods to coordinate behavior that were invented during the industrialization is used even today. In the course book, you can read about a quite recent example from Saab's factory in Trollhättan. I hope it's clear that if we take Scott's definition of an organization, basically individuals who coordinate their behavior so that they can fulfill specified goals, we do find that the history of organizations extends further back than the Industrial Revolution. An important aspect of organizations is that organizations represent social constructions. Organizations are created by individuals and therefore also a product of the society in which they are a part of. The existence of organizations ultimately depends on the existence of some desire and knowledge in a society to coordinate individuals to achieve some specified goals. In the article by William Starbuck, which you read for the first introductory session, you can read about how the expansion of the number of organizations was stimulated by major social and technological changes during the second half of the 19th century. Educational systems started to spread rapidly across the world, probably for several reasons. The Enlightenment had created rationality and introduced an aspiration among people to create the perfect man or woman. Industrialization helped create jobs that required knowledge of reading, writing. Several nations began to put restrictions on the conditions of work, which basically meant that children now could go to school. The ability to read, write, and basic numeracy might have stimulated the growth of principles used in organizations to coordinate and constrain human behavior. We know that such skills are associated with more advanced forms of coordination, rules, and job descriptions. In a way, the writing process itself might stimulate the pursuit of rationality by forcing writers to specify the focus of the text, arranging the text in sequences. Basically, the writing process implicitly teaches the knowledge of how to divide complex tasks into sequences of smaller parts and then put them all together into one whole. It is a perfect exercise for anyone who wants to create efficient job descriptions. In addition to education, population growth and new technological inventions also created the need for both larger and more advanced organizations. It's also important to remember that with the expansion of organizations came a desire to know more about these organizations. The development of organizational theory is partly linked to the industrialization. As factories grew larger, people needed theories that could help them to understand and generalize across single factories. I think we can say that organizational theory as a scientific discipline is directly linked to the changes that meant that people in general started to think about factories as organizations. They started to think about factories as a social phenomenon that was interesting and important to have a generalized knowledge about. It's also worth noting that organizational theory is a separate discipline with its own history. Leadership, which you also read in this course, represents its own discipline and is much older than organizational theory. People started to write about leadership perhaps as far back as 2000 and 3000 years BC. The idea of organizational theory, the ambition to create theories that can help us understand and generalize knowledge across organizations, about organizations, was developed just around the second half of the 20th century. In the first part of this course, you will primarily study organizational theory. In the second part of the course, in your course paper, you will combine what you learned about organizations in the first part with some basic perspectives on the leadership. Today, organization theory represents a diverse set of people with a diverse set of ambitions and ideas. It's difficult or impossible to mention all branches and all sub-disciplines or to order them. but we can try, because I think it might help you navigate among different perspectives and theories, but also to get some placeholders for the theories which you will study in this course. The Academy of Management, an American organization gathering researchers in the field of management, have a subdivision called OMT, Organization and Management Theory. This is the home for organizational theorists. They have gathered a list of keywords showing the breadth of organization theory as it is today. As you can see, organization theory as a field is diverse and there is a lot to learn. I think there are several ways to start learning about organizations. One way is to arrange the diverse set of perspectives in organizations using a timeline illustrating when each theory was developed and how progress was made in the field. For instance, we could start reading about Max Weber and bureaucracy, move on to Chester Barnard's foundational work, and then to Herbert Simon, James March, and James Thompson in the 1950s. We could mention theories such as continuity theory, institutional theory, research-dependent theory, and organizational ecology. After this, we could focus on the expanding set of branches such as organizational culture, identity, and categories. In this course, I have selected 4 important theories about organizations. You will study bureaucracy and decision-making, and you will study culture and institutions. I have chosen these theories because I think they present the most basic and fundamental insights of organizations we have. Bureaucracy and decision-making really provide a foundation for organization theory. It's about rules and decisions. Culture and institutions, on the other hand, represents a continuation of organization theory, moving away from rules and decisions to focus more on informal aspects of organizations. The 4 theories will constitute your primary toolbox for organizational analysis in this course. Hopefully the insights given from these theories will help you to better appreciate organizations and the difficulties involved in directing and redirecting them. In your course paper, you will be encouraged to apply your toolbox for organizational analysis using a leadership perspective. This means that you will study both organization theory and leadership. But the main focus will be on organization theory and developing your toolbox for organizational analysis.